The two that I think are really relevant for our times, and one is to drive all blames into one. Drive all blames into one. And then the next one we'll look at is meditate on the loving kindness of all beings. And this includes the ones we blame. Not so easy. We're given quite a task here. Um, so, what does this mean, driving all blames into one? What is the one? Well, it's us. In essence, stop blaming everything and everyone else and blame yourself. This is kind of put very blankly in plain English. Why is that? Well, think about what blame really means. Often, when I've experienced blame, and boy, there's been a lot of that going on in me around things in the political sphere and on our national scale and globally. And so part of that is to recognize the projecting of fear and anger. So Chekawayashi Dorji, who's a 12th century monk who wrote commentaries on these 7-point mind trainings, really kind of distills things down a bit into kind of the notion that when we are experiencing blame, that we're really, what is it that is being blamed? What is it that we're doing when we're blaming people for things? We may be absolutely right to be concerned about certain things. That's not to say that we are wrong about anything that we are feeling. But to reflect a bit on the projecting and the externalizing of fear and anger in particular, which really is kind of the root of blame. Now, by driving all blames into one, we're not being told to blame, to instead be afraid of ourselves and angry at ourselves, right? And don't go beyond that. What we are being asked to do, though, is just to kind of check and see what narrative am I throwing out onto other people, whether we feel justified in it or not. In my opinion, there is another Buddhist principle that is of two words that encompasses this one, and it's no blame. No blame. If we think about how blame is that which separates us, those of us who are on this path of cultivation through meditation practice, through maybe learning the teachings, we're kind of being asked to take it a step further. Last week we cultivated what we call the rare heart and had this lovely reading by Thich Nhat Hanh on the Udumbara flower, which is the rarest of all flowers on the planet. It's a white, I think it comes from a ficus plant. And in some places it blooms rarely. It's this beautiful, pristine white. Sometimes it's blue. And to cultivate the heart that is rare, the rare heart, much like the Udumbara flower. And so our meditation last week was sort of encompassing that symbolism. So what we're being asked to do, again, back to this Lojong slogan, is do something rather rare and rather that requires some heartiness. And not just heartiness, but discernment and witness, a capacity to bear witness. That dimension of our practice that we seek to cultivate, that sense of neutral equanimity. It doesn't mean that we don't act or we don't feel things, but rather we are bearing witness to the entire process of samsara as it plays out in our experience. So samsara is a Sanskrit term for the cycle of suffering that we experience. The commentator Chekawayashi Dorji tells us in his commentary of this that largely a lot of what causes blame in us is attachment. And that would include aversion. Aversion is a form of attachment. And so we're really checking in with the things that we fear, the things that trigger us, that make us angry, and being reminded to drive all blames into one, meaning, in my opinion, not to blame anything in that way with extreme harsh judgment, because what that serves to do is separate. And that may be exactly how we feel. I'm not like them. I'm not like that person. If I were them, I would do this. All of those things. It may be right on. You may be right. But it's not about being right or wrong here, right? To kind of cultivate the middle path means seeing beyond those dualities. And that second, then the next Lojong slogan, to meditate on the kindness inherent in all beings, includes the people that we're blaming. This is not easy. This is not easy. But here we find, in these teachings, we find the arising of something we call loving kindness. So right here in the Lojong teachings, it's not just about compassion, which we can see as being that which is a response to suffering by being moved to make it better, or the resolve to alleviate suffering for the benefit of all beings. But here, loving kindness being that aspiration to continue to relate, regardless of how we agree or disagree, but continuing to relate with the wish for happiness and friendliness for all beings, not just some beings. Why is that? Well, because we recognize in the commentaries, Chekawa Dorji tells us that all beings have this capacity. Underlying all the stuff that we may experience in them, we all have this capacity to be kind. And I can hear the mind going now, oh, what about sociopaths? Or what about people that, maybe in power and dictators and all? But of course, yeah, very valid, very valid. But what's interesting here, and you can see what you think about this, that the belief in Buddhism of reincarnation, that these people may have been our fathers, mothers at some point in a past life. And I bring this up not to convince you it's true, but also to hold kind of a larger context of the spirit, the attitude, quote unquote, of Lojong. That all beings are parents, perhaps, in some way, or have been. And even if they're not parents of children and such, the chances are they have cared for someone in their lifetime, hopefully, in one way or another, that there is this capacity to be kind in them, despite what they're doing. And so the heartiness of this path, this rare path of heart, is not content simply to stop with blaming, right? But to put that into perspective, yes, feeling the feelings, absolutely. But also bringing a capacity to bear witness in a way where we exemplify equanimity. It's not apathy. It's not a lack of responding. It doesn't even say we can't be an activist in the street holding signs and so on. But the depth to which we plant our anger and our fear really matters to our own well-being and how we cultivate, how we continue to cultivate, because it's so easy to get sucked into that rabbit hole, and then getting out is much harder. Have any of you experienced that of late? Just this tendency to get so caught up, whether it's from the media or whatever source of information, that it's hard to bring yourself back out of it. We don't even want to practice anymore. We want to start writing letters. I mean, I told some of you last week, I sat down and I wrote this whole manifesto. I had to get it out of what's going on. And you bet I have positions about things in the political world and all of that. But ultimately, the question then when I was done was, okay, good. Whew, you got that out. Great, good for you. Better than holding it in. Now, how are you going to go back and practice what you preach here? Right? How do you take the fear, the anger, the opinions, the indignance, the attitude that I come with, and turn that into wise discernment? How to actively respond. And thus my interest, as I said earlier, in sacred activism. What does it look like to actually take action? But not in such a way that we're just sort of shouting, and not that doesn't have a place either. It's a really important question, but it really is asking us to take the middle path, to find a path of unity as opposed to separation. And that's really the heart of the matter. What is it that unifies, not just with a certain group of people, but with humanity? So we're not just doing this for our own benefit. Yes, we are needing to do this for our benefit so we can stay resilient and not get burned out with what's happening out there. And so we need to have refuge. We need to be able to cultivate in such a way that we're feeling fairly balanced. We can still write letters and go and march and join protests, absolutely. Um, but how we cultivate the blame part is really the heart of this Lojong slogan. And I think it's never more relevant, perhaps, than even today, all over the world. And then reflecting on the kindness of all beings. And even if it's not actualized in other beings, at least believing that there is a seed of that in everyone, even if it's dormant, even if it's undeveloped. So looking at individuals, certainly in my role as a chaplain in the hospital system at Dana-Farber and Brigham and Women's, despite the disease that I'm encountering, I like to look through it and see the brightness, the luminosity of the person who's in the hospital bed. That too is reality. Even if they can't feel it within themselves, I can see it. It's not just the illness. This is not, a person who is sick is not the illness, but they are experiencing illness and they're not well. But still, to be able to see through that into the dignity, the brilliance, the luminosity of the person, even if it's very subtle, that we can cultivate. We may not be willing to with certain people, and that's fine. But ultimately, what these teachings are telling us is that if we're encountering suffering, if we're encountering someone who what we might call a tyrant, that we are encountering delusion. And this is a fundamental Buddhist principle. If we are encountering delusion, how do we respond to one who is so bent on separating? If we play into that, then we too are deluded. If we counter delusion, or rather the delusion of separation, with the cultivation of unity, what does that look like? And that's closer to the discernment that we're being asked to employ: compassion, discernment, and witness. So when we show up, when it matters, we have good support by Atisha and Cheka Wayeshi Dorji and the other masters who are trying to help us find a way through really, really difficult times. They knew this well. This is why this whole third point of mind training is on taking difficulties onto the path. It's not about sitting on the cushion and just being blissed out. But it's like when I get off the cushion, I'm back in the world of, use your expletive, your favorite expletive here. And I need to show up in a certain way. I need to respond in a certain way, in a way that helps. So, I don't know if that's helpful, but I've been talking to quite a few people who are rather exasperated and afraid of the coming election. I don't know about you, but I have no fear of that. I feel like things will play out in a wholesome way. But the key is, how do we metabolize the fear? So Tonglen, coming back to compassion meditation, a way to practice so that we can receive the fear. We receive it on the in-breath, if that's what we're dealing with, or the anger, whatever it is. We allow the rawness of the feeling to arise, absolutely. And we hold it in a heart that is spacious and open and respond to it with love. What if we could actually say to every feeling we have that's unpleasant, I love you and I will stay with you as long as it takes. and really mean it. I love you and I will stay with you as long as it takes. And so that's the spirit, the attitude of Lojong. So what we can then do, what I've been doing in my practice lately has been to pick a certain population that is either oppressed right now. For me, the racial question is huge right now. In this country, we have an opportunity in all the chaos. And so if we meditate in Tonglen with those who have been oppressed for so long, and basically feel the feeling of that, and if we can, what does it feel like to be oppressed, and breathe in that suffering, that form of suffering. So last time we were practicing breathing in our own state, our own suffering. Here, we're opening that to a particular person or a particular population of people and breathing in the suffering that we're aware of them experiencing. And for some, it's daily. It's daily. Imagine living our lives where we're afraid to walk out the door because of microaggressions. People live every day with that. And so what does it mean to breathe in that particular experience? To take it into our bodies and hold it and respond with loving compassion, with the light of our love, and then sending it out to all beings who experience this as well. Then maybe we can also do that for the environment. Breathing in the degradation, breathing in the suffering in the environment, and breathing out and extending to all earth and all wildlife the sense of genuine the light of our loving compassion unconditionally, and so on. So we can keep widening these circles and practicing with Tonglen in various kinds of circles or with specific people or certain things. It's a very fluid, open practice based on what we are encountering from one moment to the next. And this is what it's meant to be: spontaneous cultivation of compassion. So it really does change everything. We cannot experience fear and loving compassion at the same time. Just try it. It doesn't work. If you are in a place of experiencing true, open, loving compassion and extending that to yourself and all beings, you can't have fear in that state. If you do, well, we can go back and forth very quickly. We can be part of that mind that's just bouncing very quickly. But over time, as we're able to remain and linger in that state of compassion, the fear diminishes, the anger diminishes, the resentment tends to sort of dissolve. It may come back, but this is why we keep practicing. We don't want to deny those things, but rather respond to them with more compassion.